Hey guys, do you know about that one hero who accidentally murdered his entire family and then had to clean up a king's cosmic mess just to make it up to the gods? Yeah. Tonight's story isn't bedtime material. It's rage, guilt, blood, and some paperwork. Picture this. The sun has just dipped behind the olive trees of Thebes, and the smell of warm stone still rises from the earth. There's silence. No birds. No wind. Just a man standing alone, chest heaving, knuckles raw. His eyes are wild. Blood, not all of it. His pence, his arms, his neck, the folds of his tunic. Something inside him has cracked, broken open like a melon, under a war hammer. That man is Hercules. You've heard of him, right? Strongest man alive. Half bade, half human, all biceps. You probably won't survive this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe it, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, Hercules had just come home, and home wasn't there anymore. There are many versions of this moment, but most agree on this. He walked through his front door, covered in blood, holding the lifeless bodies of his wife and children. They were dead by his own hands, not because he wanted it, not because he meant it, but because Hera, queen of the gods, decided to remind him that no mortal, not even a demigod, should be born from her husband's infidelity. So she drove him mad, not just a fever, not just delusion. This was God-forged madness. The kind that twists your mind like a laurel wreath dipped in poison. The kind that makes you forget who you are and forget who your children are. Historians still argue whether Hercules truly lost control, or if the stories later softened of the horror for posterity. Either way, what happened next was grief. Black, clinging, feral grief. The kind you can't scrub off, no matter how many rivers you walk through. So he ran. He left Thebes, barefoot, ragged, with the smell of smoke still curling in his hair. He wandered for days, maybe weeks. Some say he stopped speaking. Others claim he roared like a lion when he was alone. The point is, he was unraveling. And then Delphi, the oracle, waited in the temple, veiled in white mist and fumes of laurel and babe. Hercules stood in the shadows, a broken titan made of muscle and sorrow. He didn't ask for redemption. He didn't beg for mercy. He simply said, "What must I do?" The oracle paused, and through her cracked voice, thick with smoke and divine command, she answered, "Serve Eurystheus. 12 labors. Complete them, and your soul may find peace." Now let's be clear, Eurystheus wasn't a hero. He wasn't a warrior. He was a king appointed by Hera's favor, a petty bureaucrat with a god complex and a deep fear of Hercules. Honestly, the kind of guy who would file paperwork against a thunderstorm. But he had divine authority now, which meant Hercules had to obey him, and Eurystheus. Oh, he didn't hold back. He grinned like a man who'd just realized he could set tasks so ridiculous, so fatal, they'd never be completed. Because if Hercules followed even once, he'd never be free. So began the labors. But first Hercules needed a reset. He shaved his hair, burned his old lionskin cloak, walked into a river, and stayed submerged until his skin turned blue. That's the quirky detail scholars like to debate. Was it ritual? Was it self-punishment, or maybe he just wanted to feel clean again, if only for a moment? When he stepped back onto land, water running down his spine, he was no longer Hercules the husband, or Hercules the killer. He was just Hercules, the laborer, and the first labor was waiting, the Nemean Lion. But we're not there yet. Let's linger here a bit longer, because something subtle shifted in the heavens that day. Zeus, watching from Olympus, said nothing. Hera, smug and cold, folded her arms. Apollo, god of prophecy and music, just looked away. Only Athena whispered down to him, not words, Just a quiet thought. Do not let your name become your cage. You see, Hercules wasn't born with that name. He was born Alcides. The name Heracles came Lateronically. It means glory of Hera. A cruel joke, some say, a prophecy, others claim. The name was both a curse and a calling. And now, that name would be tested. Back in Thebes, they burned what was left of his home. Too many bad memories, too much ash. But from that ash, something began. Not forgiveness, not yet, but purpose. Eurystheus's messenger found him 3 days later, sitting beneath a fig tree, sharpening a bronze blade. The king requires your presence, the man said, trying not to look directly at the blood-slick armor piled beside him. Hercules stood. Then let's go, he replied. They walked in silence. Along the way, villagers whispered behind their doors. Children hid. Dogs whimpered. But one old woman, blind, maybe senileric doubt, and touched his arm. Don't let them eat you alive, she whispered. Hercules nodded. He didn't know who them was, but he would soon. Eurystheus sat on his throne like a man pretending it was comfortable. The court was filled with nobles, scrolls, the occasional peacock. Hercules stepped in barefoot. No weapons, no bow, just muscle and silence. Ah, the king smirked. Our hero returns, and ready to serve. I hear Hercules said nothing. Eurystheus waved dramatically. Then allow me to gift you your first labor, a beast, a lion. But not just any lion. This one's hide is invulnerable. Blades break on it. Arrows bounce off. It has eaten every hunter I've sent. Its cave lies in Nemea. Bring me its skin. Simple. Hercules didn't bow, didn't nod. He just turned and left. The moment the doors closed, Eurystheus muttered, he won't survive the week. And if he did, well, the king was already drafting labor number 2. That's what people forget. The labors weren't tests of strength, were contracts, loopholes, attempts to break the unbreakable. And Hercules knew it. He didn't head to Nemea immediately. First, he visited a blacksmith. Not to buy weapons but to trade them. He gave away his bronze sword. Instead, he asked for rawhide gloves, a net, and a heavy wooden club carved from a single olive tree. The blacksmith raised an eyebrow, not expecting to kill it the usual way. No point. Hercules replied, can't cut what can't be cut. Then he walked into the wild. The forests of Nemea were ancient, trees taller than temples, shadows that moved when you weren't looking. They say the lion wasn't just strong, it was smart. It lured travelers in, played with them. Some say it could shift shape. Others claim it wasn't born of nature at all, but of Nyx, goddess of night. The scholarly debate continues, but Hercules, he didn't care. He was hunting something that shouldn't exist, and it was waiting. But that is a tale for next time. The trees of Nemea don't rustle like normal trees. Their branches creak with intention, like they're whispering secrets you aren't meant to hear. Hercules moved through them without hurry, one hand resting on the rough wood of his new olive club. The other brushed aside vines that hung like funeral veils from gnarled trunks. He could smell it before he saw it. Death, not fresh, not quite rot either. That strange in-between scent like old blood in damp fabric. Something had died here. Many somethings, and none of them had been given peace. The Nemean Lion didn't roar. It didn't need to. It watched. It waited. And it knew how to vanish into the folds of the forest, like smoke into fabric. Hercules stepped into a clearing that looked almost curated. Bones laid out in patterns. Pelts, half decayed, nailed to trees like war trophies. And there, barely visible in the dappled light, were claw marks on stone. Deep gouges that went 3 fingers into solid rock. He crouched, touched the marks. Then he smiled. Found you. No answer. Of course not. But the air thickened. Quirky. Detail time. Some fringe versions of the myth claimed the lion wasn't just Hera's creaturite, was her son. born of Selene, the moon goddess. That it wasn't really a lion at all, but a lunar beast, sent to mock the sunborn strength of Hercules. Others say it was once a man, cursed to live as a predator, for failing to honor a burial rite. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: this wasn't an animal. It was an executioner. Hercules set his trap anyway. He carved a shallow pit, filled it with sharpened stakes, then covered it with leaves and brush. Standard stuff. Predictable. Not even worth explaining in detail, because it didn't work. The lion didn't fall in. It waited until night, then came for him directly. No roar, no warning, just two yellow eyes opening like wounds in the dark. It leaped from a tree branches. From above the end, Hercules barely had time to raise his club before they collided. The impact drove him backward into a tree. So hard the bark cracked, and now we're in it. The lion was massive. Not big cat massive. This was almost Mythical scale. Its mane shimmered like hammered bronze in the moonlight. Its breath came in hot blasts, flecked with bits of meat. Its claws were thick as carving knives, and nothing Hercules did seemed to hurt it. He swung the club across its snout. The lion stumbled, shook its head, then lunged again. He caught it in a grapple, one arm locked around its neck, the other trying to avoid the claws raking at his side. They crashed through underbrush, over roots, into another clearing, then silence, just panting blood, and the hum of insects fleeing the area. Hercules was bleeding, not badly, but enough. The lion circled. He'd tried brute force. It wasn't enough. So now, something different. He waited, breathed, watched, and when the lion leaped, Aegon didn't swing. He ducked. The beast flew over him, landed hard, turned. Too slow, and Hercules was already on its back. Not stabbing, not clubbing, but tightening both arms around its throat. They thrashed, rolled, crashed into rocks. The lion bit at him. Hercules squeezed. He held on, even as his arms went numb, even as its claws scraped his ribs, even as his own shoulder dislocated with a sickening pop. He didn't let go, and then something gave. The lion slumped. Its body went slack, and the forest exhaled. Hercules didn't move for a long time, just sat beside the body, head resting on its main chest, heaving like a forge bellows. His hands shook, more from exhaustion than pain. It was over well. Almost now came the part Eurystheus hadn't planned for, skinning the thing. Turns out, you can't cut through an invulnerable hide, not with bronze, not even with sharp obsidian. Hercules tried, snapped 3 blades. Then he had an idea. He took one of the lion's own claws, used it like a knife, and it worked, like poetic justice. Some scholars debate whether this acting the beast's own body against itself was meant as a metaphor, redemption through the very thing that destroyed you. Others just think it's really cool that he figured it out. Either way, by sunrise, Hercules had wrapped himself in the skin. It wasn't just a trophy, it was armor. The head became a hood draped over his shoulder. The golden pelt hung down his back like a cape of gods. And when he walked out of that forest, bloodied, bruised, but undefeated, he didn't look like a man anymore. He looked like a myth. When he returned to Tyrannus, the city buzzed. People peeked through windows. Children followed him at a distance, whispering Eurystheus. Upon seeing him in the lion's skin, actually panicked. He ducked behind a curtain, ordered his guards to build a bronze storage jarries, a literal jar large enough to hide in so he could jump into it whenever Hercules showed up. It's hilarious now, sure, but at the time, it was fear. Honest fear. The king cleared his throat. Well, I see you've succeeded. Hercules didn't reply. Eurystheus, flustered, added quickly, good, wonderful, but you're not done. No praise, no gold, just the next command. The Hydra of Lerna, he said, kill it. Hercules said nothing, just turned and walked. Away now, the Hydra, that's a different nightmare. But back to the lion for a second. Did you know some later Roman soldiers wore replica lion pelts in battle? Not real ones. Too rare. But ceremonial copies, tied back to this momentous single battle in a forest that smelled of blood and moonlight. That's the staying power of a story, well thought out. As Hercules walked toward the swampy marshes of Lerna, the pelt shifted on his shoulders like it was still alive. The skin was warm. The mane seemed to resist dirt. And for the first time in weeks, people didn't shrink away from him. They stared in awe, not at the man, but at what he carried, at what he'd endured. That's what laborers do, after all. They reshape how the world sees you, one myth at a time. Swamps don't sing. Not really. They mutter. They belch. They breathe through cattails and reedy sighs. And the Lernian marshlands, well, they had their own particular sound, thick with insects, distant with croaking things you couldn't quite see. Beneath every step, the ground bubbled and sucked, like the land itself was second-guessing your decision to walk on it. And in the center of this green, gurgling misery, a cave, black as oil, low to the waterline, breathing fog like a sleeping monster. That was Hydra's home. And yes, the Hydra, capital H, the one with the heads, plural. How many depends on which historian you ask. Some say 9, others say 50. The wildest accounts go into the hundreds. Realistically, probably somewhere between 7 and 10. But again, realistically stopped mattering the moment it grew 2 heads for every one you cut off. Hercules knew this going in. He'd heard the stories. Hunters going in with swords, and coming back with, well, not much. So he didn't go alone. His nephew Iolaus joined him. Young, clever, and more importantly, bound by divine mandate, which meant if things got messy, and they would, Iolaus could move outside the lines. But let's not skip ahead. First, the approach. Even getting to the Hydra's cave was a task. The swamp resisted them at every step. Vines tried to trip them. Water refused to show its depth. At one point, Hercules nearly sank to his waist in a patch of green mud, so deceptively calm it might have been soup. This thing better be worth it, Iolaus muttered, tugging on a vine. It won't be, Hercules said, not turning. They camped near the cave entrance that night. Didn't risk fire. Just lay in silence. The sound of dripping water mixing with an odd humming that definitely wasn't frogs. And then, morning came. Sort of. The swamp didn't do bright daylight. Just thinner fog. Hercules stood at the cave's mouth, lion pelt draped over him, club in one hand, bow slung over his shoulder. The arrows were dipped in poison just, encasing his bronze blade, though likely useless, hung at his hip for tradition's sake. Stay back, he said to Iolaus, and stepped inside it. First, just silence, then heat, then something worse. The Hydra didn't roar. It hissed, like an ocean of steam through broken flutes. The sound filled the cave, bouncing between the walls, vibrating through the floor, and then it showed itself. Its heads emerged like ropes pulled from the dark, scaly, long-necked eyes, glowing faintly, not red but yellow, like oil lanterns almost out of wick. Their teeth were jagged and wet, and when one mouth opened, it didn't bite teeth spat, acid dot. A long strand of it arced toward Hercules, sizzling where it struck the stone. He ducked, rolled, came up swinging. The club hit one head crack. It slumped for a moment. Then 2 more rose in its place. That's new, he muttered. This was the Hydra's trick. You couldn't just fight it. You had to outthink it. Which, let's be honest, wasn't usually Hercules' favorite approach. He tried arrows next 3 in quick succession. 1 head dropped, then 2. Then another dot more grew dot. So he switched to his sword, slicing clean through 2 necks at once, and got 4 more for his trouble. Backed into a corner now, he gritted his teeth. Slid his feet through slime and bones. The cave smelled of sulfur, rot, and something oddly floral like the gods had added perfume to a dumpster fire. That's when he shouted. Now Iolaus didn't wait. He ran in carrying a bundle of flaming, torches-wrapped reeds, soaked and pitchened. Thrust the first one against the stump of a still hissing neck. Sizzle, shriek, smoke. The stump blackened. Nothing grew back. That'll do, Hercules grinned. They moved fast then. Hercules lopped off heads, one after the other, as Iolaus darted behind him with fire. Burn, cut, over and over. Of course, the Hydra wasn't just standing. Still, one of its heads, central one, some say immortal, lunged, and caught Hercules by the leg, dragging him across the cave. Another slammed into his side, sending him spinning against a stalagmite. His ribs cracked. He could feel it. He screamed, not from pain, from rage. He grabbed one of the torches himself and shoved it directly into the thing's eye. The head reeled. Black smoke filled the air. Somewhere in the fog, Iolaus coughed violently. By the time they reached the final head, both men were coated in slime, blood, and ash. Hercules' arm was numb, his leg ached, his lion skin was burning at the edges, but he kept going. The last head wasn't fast. It was smart, it hissed, pulling back into the shadows like it could sense its end. Hercules followed, cornered it, and this time, didn't cut. He wrapped both hands around the thing's neck and squeezed. It fought, coiled, dug its claws into his sides, bit at his face, but Hercules didn't let go. He squeezed until it cracked, until it went limp, and then silenced. The cave, once pulsing with menace, now echoed like an empty tomb. They dragged the body out piece by piece. Hercules didn't want a trophy this time. He wanted the blood. Because Hydra's blood was poison, and in a twist of divine irony, it would become his greatest weapon. He dipped his arrows in it, let them dry in the sun. These would later kill centaurs, monsters, and, spoiler, lead to his own undoing. Funny how that works. Some versions of the story say Hera watched all this from a cloud and scowled. Others say she laughed. Either way, she knew she'd have to escalate, but Eurydice panicked again. When Hercules returned, dragging the proof behind him, the king didn't even come out of his chambers. He sent a servant. That one didn't count. The servant mumbled, "Because your nephew helped." Classic technicality. Still, everyone knew the truth. The Hydra was dead, and Hercules wounded, limping and coughing. Blood was still standing. Later, while Iolaus tended to the burn marks on his uncle's arms, he asked, "Why keep going?" Hercules didn't answer at first, just stared into the middle distance, where a pair of vultures circled high above the swamp. Then, softly, he said, "Because I have to. Because if I stop, I'll start remembering." And that was that. The next labor would take him far north, into wild forests, after something far less deadly, but no less divine. A deer, but not just any deer. One touched by Artemis herself, and catching it. That might make the gods angrier than killing a Hydra ever did. You wouldn't think a deer could cause this much trouble. And not just any deer, a golden one. Fast as a whispered lie, silent as moonlight, and sacred to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. Sacred, that's the important part. Because you could wrestle lions, decapitate serpents, and club monsters into the dirt. But if you touched what belonged to a god, you were on holy watch lists for life. Still, that was labor number 3. Catch the Cernian hind. Not kill, not wound, just catch. Easy, right? Except this deer could outrun arrows. Some said it never touched the ground. Others believed it was born from the very light of the stars over Mount Artemisium. Its hooves were said to strike no sound, and its horns, not antlers, actual gold. Real, glinting, impossible Thomas gold. Perfect for stealing, and perfectly fatal. If you got caught, Hercules set out, just after recovering from the Hydra. His ribs were still sore. His left arm itched, where one of the hydra's burns had blistered. But rest was a luxury the labors didn't allow. He traveled north through Arcadia, where the woods start to feel less like nature and more like something watching you back. Tall trees, wet moss, and a quiet that felt judgmental. He moved slowly, patiently. No club, no sword, just a bow and soft sandals. He didn't want to kill the hind. He just needed to catch it. For someone whose usual strategy was break it until it stops moving. This was new ground. Days passed, then weeks. He caught glimpses, a flicker of gold between trees, the sound of hooves on leaves with no direction. Once, he crested a ridge and saw it drinking from a river cam radiant. Beautiful. He didn't move, didn't breathe, but the hind lifted its head, looked directly at him, and vanished in less time than it takes to blink. And so began the chase. Not a single battle, not a roaring dolbot, a pursuit, a dance, sometimes on foot, sometimes horseback. He chased it across Arcadia, into Aetolia, even as far as Thrace. Wherever he went, locals said the same thing. Oh yes, we saw it. Last week, over that ridge. Beautiful, isn't it? It always stayed ahead. Hercules began to dream about it. Not in nightmarish, just quiet dreams of gold, in motion, of something he could never reach. He started to forget why he was chasing it. It became habit, purpose, a deer in the mind. Scholars debate whether this labor was symbolic, an act of humility after 2 brutal battles, a divine timeout, or maybe the gods were just playing a joke. Make the brute play tag with a deer, they said. Let's see how he handles patience. Eventually, the seasons shifted. Autumn crept into the woods, and the leaves turned bronze, then crimson. And one dawn, in the foothills of Mount Artemisius, Hercules spotted her again. Closer this time. He didn't charge, didn't run. He walked softly, and the hind didn't move, just watched. He lowered his bow. Still she stayed. Then, slowly, he dipped his fingers into a nearby sprinkler. Cold mountain burnin' flicked a few drops into the air. The sound distracted her, just enough. He moved. Not a sprint, not a lunge, just one smooth motion, and his hand caught her leg. The hind kicked, leaped, screamed like wind deer. Don't usually scream, but this one died and thrashed with a strength that surprised him. But he held on. It took hours to calm her. He whispered to her, like you would a frightened horse. Let her nuzzle his shoulder, felt her breath on his neck. When she finally stilled, he tied a soft cord around her neck, loose enough to slip off, and began the long walk back. But the gods had been watching. Just as he reached the river Loddon, a thunderclap split the sky. Not Zeus's kind, but sharper, a divine sound. Artemis herself stepped from the shadows. And let's pause. Her Artemis doesn't do small talk. She appeared cloaked in moonlight, eyes silver, expression blank as marble, her voice, ice and silk. Hercules. He didn't kneel. You have taken what is mine. He looked at the hind. I was told to bring her. To him, she asked, disdain curling in her lip. That coward king for penance. He didn't answer. Artemis moved closer, one pale hand resting on the hind's neck. The deer trembled. You are not stupid, she said. So I'll ask only once, why Hercules thought about lying. Instead, he said, because I killed my children. Silence. The goddess tilted her head. And this will unkill them? No. Then why do it? Hercules looked at the deer, at his own hands. Because it's the only thing I have left. There was a long pause. Then Artemis sighed. She took the hind's cord, undid it with a gesture, and nodded. Go, she whispered. But the deer didn't run, it stayed. For just a moment longer, then, finally, turned and disappeared into the trees. Artemis looked at Hercules again. Tell you caught her. That's true enough. But she returns with me. He nodded, and she vanished. When he arrived back in Tyrannus, he told the king, truthfully, that he had caught the hind and released it only at the goddess's request. Eurystheus grumbled, scratched his chin, almost asked for proof, but something in Hercules' expression made him stop. Fine, he said. It counts. Of course, he was already planning the next labor, one that smelled of snow and sounded like screams. But before we leave this one behind it, you know the Ceryneian hind appears carved into temple walls, even centuries later. Not the lion, not the hydra, the deer. Scholars say it represented the moment Hercules didn't kill, the labor where he didn't rely on strength, a pause in the violence, a lesson in restraint, a heartbeat of grace, before the storm to come, and the storm. Oh, it's coming. The next labor would take Hercules to Mount Erymanthos high above the clouds, into snow and cold ants, straight into a bar fight with a bunch of tipsy centaurs. Because of course it would. Mount Erymanthos doesn't welcome visitors, it broods. From a distance it looks like a slumbering god stretched beneath a quilt of snow and black pine. The air up there bites without warning. The wind isn't playful, it's accusatory. And somewhere, amid that frozen wilderness, lurks a boar. Not just big, not just angry, a creature of such sheer stubborn violence that even wolves give it space. Labor number 4. Capture the Erymanthian boar, alive. Not kill, not butcher, not even injure, if possible. Just drag it back whole, furious, and ideally, not gnawing on his leg. So Hercules climbed, alone, this time. Iolaus had stayed behind, still rubbing burn ointment from the hydra labor. Hercules didn't mind the solitude. The thin air suited his mood. On the 3rd day of climbing, snow began to fall. Not gently. The kind of snowfall that erases trails, covers your scent, and convinces you you've never taken a step in your life. He found temporary shelter in a shallow cave. And this is where our story takes a sharp detour, because while waiting out the storm, Hercules wasn't alone. He smelled wine before he saw the light. Not metaphorical wine, actual wine. Warm, spiced, and floating in a breeze that should have smelled like frozen death. He stepped out to investigate, and, to his surprise, stumbled onto a familiar scene. Laughter, shouting, and the clink of goblets centaurs, dozens of them now. If you're picturing the noble, scholarly centaurs from modern retellings, slow down. These were wild mountain centaurs. Half horse, half men, and fully enthusiastic about their wine. They drank like sailors, argued like brothers, and occasionally trampled small trees just to prove a point. In the center of it all stood Pholus. Unlike the rest, Pholus was calm, a scholar, a vegetarian, even a fact that delighted some mythologists who insist on slipping him into every noble centaur debate. Hercules, he called out with genuine warmth. You're early, or late. Either way, come drink. Hercules didn't hesitate. He liked Pholus. They shared old battle stories, and once, a disastrous attempt at philosophy. But the wine was sacred, a gift from Dionysus himself, stored in a massive sealed amphora, meant to be opened only in celebration, or with permission from the gods. Thought so naturally they opened it. Just 1 goblet, they promised, then 2, then 6. Now centaur wine isn't normal wine. It's stronger, wilder, steeped in forest herbs, and fermented in oak barrels that were probably haunted. A single gulp could fog the brain of a grown bull. Hercules drank slowly. The other centaurs, not so much. Within the hour, the party had devolved into a chaotic symphony of hooves, laughter, and increasingly aggressive interpretive dancing. One centaur tried to race a falling pine cone. Another attempted to sing an ode to the moon while upside down. And then came the shouting. Centaurs from nearby mountains caught the scent of the wine and came charging, dozens of them, uninvited, furious that someone had broken the sacred seal. They accused Pholus of betrayal, accused Hercules of arrogance. Someone threw a goblet, Someone else drew a crude wooden spear. And just like that, it was war. Centaurs attacked in a blur of hooves and fists. Hercules tried not to fight, tried to defuse the chaos, but one stomped his foot and insulted his lion pelt. That did it. He grabbed a fallen tree, branch, and swung. Centaurs flew like leaves in a storm. The fight spilled into the forest. One of the intruders landed awkwardly on a slope and vanished down the mountainside, his scream echoing like a wounded flute. Somewhere in the mess, Pholus shouted, "This is why I host dinner alone." Eventually, the rest fled, leaving only moans and shattered goblets in the snow. Hercules stood panting, bruised and soaked in wine. Pholus, brushing pine needles from his mane, said, "Well, that escalated. It was supposed to be a quiet stopover. Instead, Hercules left behind a dozen grumbling, bandaged centaurs, and a very apologetic host with a cracked amphora. Some versions of the myth say Pholus died from handling one of Hercules' poisoned arrows. Others say he simply packed up and moved to a quieter mountain. But back to the... You ever walk into a place and immediately regret everything about your life? That was the Augean stables. Labor number 5 or 6. Depending on which list you're following, sounded deceptively simple. Clean a stable. That's it. No fighting, no magic, no 12-headed surprises. Just mucking out a barn, except this wasn't a barn. It was a biblical mess, and this wasn't a cleanup, it was a punishment disguised as housework. Let's set the scene. The stables belonged to King Augeas of Elis, a man with 2 notable accomplishments: owning more cattle than any mortal had a right to, and never once cleaning up after them. Ever. Some say 30 years worth of waste sat in those stalls. Others say it was closer to 50. Either way, the smell had evolved. It wasn't just manurite, was history. A layered, fermented ecosystem of ancient cow crimes. And the cows, they were sacred, immortal even. A gift from Helios, the sun god, which meant they were healthy, productive, and very, very regular. By the time Hercules arrived, the fields around the stables were slick with runoff. Flies the size of coins clouded the air. Birds circled overhead and decided against landing. Even the dirt looked sick, and Hercules, he'd just wrestled a boar uphill. His back ached. His boots were still frozen from Mount Erymann, and now this King Augeas greeted him with a grin that looked suspiciously like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "You're here to clean the stables?" he asked, all innocence. Hercules nodded. "In a day," he added. Augeas blinked. "You mean, you want a day?" "No," Hercules said. "I've been told I have a day. Which is, let's be honest, ridiculous. The math didn't work. Even with a team of 50 men, it would take weeks to shovel out that much waste." But Hercules wasn't planning to use shovels. He walked the perimeter, took in the landscape, noticed 2 rivers nearby, Alpheus and Peneus, both flowing strong, both downhill from a nearby ridge, and in that moment, he smiled. Now some scholars debate whether Hercules had divine inspiration here, or if he'd simply spent enough time shoveling awful things to develop brilliant survival instincts. Either way, the solution was simple, radical, and deeply satisfying. Divert the rivers, not clean the mess, wash it away. He took out his pickaxe, started cutting channels, 2 trenches, one on each side of the stable, slowly leading toward the riverbanks. Locals gathered to watch, confused at first, then fascinated, then horrified. "Is he going to?" "Yes," someone whispered. "He's going to drown the poop." By midday, the channels were dug up. By afternoon, Hercules smashed the final embankment and stepped back. Water rushed in like justice. It crashed through the stables, brown and frothy and smelling of divine judgment. The walls trembled. The cows mooed in outrage. A Paiwi was there. A Piwa swept off its feet and rode the current out the barn doors. Within hours, the Augean stables were clean, not just cleaner, spotless. You could have held a wedding reception. In there, Hercules stood in the mud, drenched, soaked to the knees, arms crossed. Augeas, on the other hand, was not impressed. You didn't clean them, he huffed. You cheated. I removed the waste. With rivers, your stables are clean. You destroyed half the paddock. The paddock is cleaner than your palace. Now here's the twist. Hercules had made a deal before the labor. If he finished the job in a day, Augeas had promised him 1/10 of the cattle. Payment for labor. But now the king wanted out of it. Claimed Hercules didn't do the work manually. Claimed it wasn't within the spirit of the agreement. And just like that, refused to pay. This part of the myth. Wildly debated. Some versions say Hercules was furious and killed Augeas on the spot. Others say he left in silence, biding his time, and returned later with an army to burn the whole kingdom down. There's even a version where Augeas dies of sudden intestinal distress, symbolic, if nothing else. But what matters here? The labor technically counted, even though Eurystheus tried to disqualify it later, because he was paid for it. The truth was, the job got done. The stables were cleaner than ever. The people of Elis actually started maintaining them afterward. One accidental infrastructure upgrade at a time. And speaking of fringe details, one obscure version of the tale insists Hercules built a system of stone aqueducts afterward, the earliest version of plumbing in the region. No proof, of course, but it's a nice thought. Hercules, the original civil engineer, back in Tyrants. When Hercules returned to report the completion, Eurystheus did what he always did when Hercules succeeded. He panicked. Not with a shovel, the king shrieked. Not with a broom, but they're clean. Hercules replied, doesn't count. Even the scribes looked confused. But Eurystheus was already waving him away, eyes wide with the thrill of a new idea. Fine, fine, he shouted. I have something better. Something with wings, and just like that, the next labor was assigned. Hunt the Stymphalian birds, which, if you're picturing sparrows or doves, prepare yourself. These were metal-feathered killing machines with a taste for human eyes. But before we go there, one final detail about the Augean labor that sticks with historians. It's the only task where Hercules didn't fight a living thing. He fought his system. He found a better way. And that, perhaps, is what truly scared the kings and gods more than all his strength. Because a strong man can be stopped, but a clever one, that's when the rules start to change. Some skies whisper, others scream. The skies over Lake Stym follows. They hissed sharp and metallic, like 1,000 knives brushing past each other. Not birdsong, not wind, just the sound of wings slicing air, like it owed them money. Labor number 7. Drive away the Stymphalian birds. Not kill, mind you. Just get them to leave. This might sound reasonable. You learn the birds in question had razor-sharp feathers, bronze beaks, and a known preference for gouging out the eyes of anything that looked up too long. They didn't migrate. They nested hard, and when frightened, they didn't flee the attacked en masse. Some versions claim they were born of Ares, god of war. Others say Hephaestus made them in a fit of divine mischief, but the more romantic fringe scholars argue they were cursed sirens transferred into birds after offending Hera by singing during one of her temple baths. Either way, they were now roosting in the marshes of Arcadia and turning the whole area into a no-go zone. Farmers abandoned the fields. Travelers vanished. One guy came back covered in pinholes and wouldn't stop mumbling about the sky biting back. Eurystheus, naturally, loved the idea. Go shoo the birds, he said. Should be fun. Hercules, still carrying the faint stench of post-stable triumph, didn't even roll his eyes. He headed north. Lake Stym follows was less lake, more festering swamp by the time he arrived. Reeds as tall as a man, water so dark it reflected nothing, and the distant sound of clattering wings. He couldn't even see the birds at first, but he could feel them, the way the trees hunched, the way no other animals stirred. the way the wind refused to blow over the water. Hercules crept along the edge, scanning the canopy, and then he heard it. The unmistakable zing of metal cutting air. He ducked instinctively. A bronze feather buried itself in the tree trunk behind him. He stood up slowly, eyes narrowed. "Oh," he muttered. "So that's how it is." Now, normally he'd try brute force, but bows were no use to many birds, too fast, and fire. Not in a marsh. That's how you get legendary smoke damage. So he needed something else. He needed noise. Cue Athena, yes, the goddess herself. She appeared quietly, like she always did. No lightning, no trumpets, just a flicker of presence, and suddenly, there she was, armored, elegant, annoyed. "You look stuck," she said, brushing imaginary dust from her shoulder. "I'm thinking," Hercules replied. "Dangerous pastime. You have a suggestion?" She handed him something. 2 bronze crotala, think giant clappers, or castanets, for the gods. Loud, sharp, and designed by Hephaestus himself, probably, while caffeinated. "These," she said, "will scare them." Scare? They hate sudden noise, especially divine percussion. He raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me to fight flying daggers with musical instruments. I'm telling you to trust your brain for once." Then she vanished. Typical. Hercules walked back into the marsh, took position beneath the thickest canopy, raised the crotala high, and clapped, crack, a sound like thunder trapped in a bronze bell, cracked again. The trees shook, the air vibrated, and the birds, they exploded from the trees in a cyclone of screeches and shimmering feathers, hundreds, maybe thousands, each with wings sharper than swords, beaks like drills, and rage in their little avian hearts. They circled, screamed. Dove. Hercules didn't flinch. He clapped again. Crack. A dozen birds veered off mid-dive. Dazed by the sound, he took the opportunity to swing. Not his club too slow. He grabbed a flat paddle of bark, sharpened one side, and began swatting. A blur of feathers, blood, screeches. Some birds fell, most fled. He wasn't trying to kill them all, just make them go away. And slowly, they did. The noise disrupted their patterns. The constant thunder of the crotala shattered their flight rhythm. They scattered, directionless, panicked, toward the mountains, toward somewhere. Anathoth didn't ring with bronze fury. By sunset, the sky had cleared. Not fully, but enough. The lake was quiet again. Hercules lowered the clappers, chest rising and falling like the wind he'd just summoned. Then, as if to add insult to victory, a lone bird flopped down nearby, wounded, still twitching, and tried to peck his shin. He stepped on it, gently, resolutely. Nope. He left a handful of feathers behind, proof for Eurystheus, and started walking. And here's your quirky fringe detail. Some say one of those feathers found its way into the quill of an Athenian poet, who later used it to write the earliest version of a sky war myth. Totally unconfirmed, but romantic if you squint. When Hercules returned, Eurystheus was unimpressed. You scared them, yes, with Rattle's crotala, and they left. For now, so they could come back. Everything comes back eventually, Hercules replied, and walked away before the king could object, because the next labor wasn't one you argued with, not when it had hooves and fire in its breath. The Cretan bull was waiting, and Crete had its own madness. Crete smells like salt and old ambition. The air is sharper there. The hills lean into the sea like they're eavesdropping, and every stone remembers something, especially the palace of King Minos, where the walls are tangled with legends, and the basements hold secrets that bleat. But Hercules wasn't here for a maze or a minnow, taur. Not this time. Labor number 8. Capture the Cretan bull, big, mad, fire-breathing, technically a gift from Poseidon, but like most divine favors, it had gone sideways fast. Poseidon had loaned the bull to King Minos ransom, stubborn, slightly too in love with his own echoes, a symbol of divine support for his rule. A white bull, perfect in form, glowing with seafoam light. The deal was simple. Show the bull, sacrifice it back to the god. But Minos got greedy. He kept it, fed it, groomed it, showed it off like a prized racehorse. So Poseidon cursed it. Not just the bull bed, everything around it. It grew wild, restless. Flames puffed from its nostrils when angered. Its hide shimmered like polished marble, hooves cracked the earth, and the island. It began to suffer crop failures, storms, strange births. Minos, in typical regal fashion, decided not to take responsibility, and instead shoved the problem into a paddock and said, "Someone else deal with this." Enter Hercules. He arrived by ship, arms crossed, lion pelt flapping in the sea wind. The Cretans didn't cheer. They didn't offer olives or flutes. They mostly stared, because this wasn't mainland myth anymore. This was Crete. Different rules. The king greeted him in a half-hearted robe, already sweating. "You're here for the bull," Minos said. "I am. I don't care what you do with it. Just get it off my island." That was the whole briefing. No good luck. "No, it breathes fire, by the way." Just that dry Cretan shrugged, so Hercules set off inland. The bull wasn't hiding. It never did. He found it in an open field, pacing a rut deep into the grass, white as moonlight. Eyes like burning wine. Every breath steamed in the heat, leaving scorch marks on the clover. He watched it for a long time. It didn't run, didn't charge. It just stared, waiting. You might expect some grand strategy here. A trap, a rope, maybe sedativs. Nope. Hercules put down his gear, rolled his shoulders, and walked into the field now. The bull wasn't stupid. It had been hunted before. Soldiers, archers, even a demigod or two. But this one didn't carry weapons, didn't shout. Just moved like a mountain, deciding to walk. The bull snorted, lowered its head, then charged, and Hercules didn't flinch. He sidestepped at the last second, grabbed the beast by the horns, and twisted. They went down together in a thunder of hooves and earth. The ground shuddered. Birds fled the trees. Somewhere nearby, a vineyard snapped under pressure. But he held on. It was strength against fury, flesh against fire. The bull bucked, kicked. Its hooves ripped sod like parchment. It dragged Hercules for 20 feet before he found his grip again, dug his feet in, and roared not a battle cry, but something deeper, a sound from the pit of guilt and exhaustion. He slammed the bull to its side, and didn't kill it, just pinned it, held its head to the dirt until it stopped moving, and then it stopped. No more struggle, no more flame, just breathing, heavy, reluctant, almost respectful. Hercules stood slowly, let the horns go. The bull didn't rise, just looked at him, long and hard. Then, without a sound, it walked to the edge of the field and waited. He tied a lead around its thick neck knot to tighten, let it back. Tenacious, like a shepherd walking a storm. Now here's your fringe detail. Some old scroll formed and probably exaggerated claim that the bull spoke before leaving the field. Just one word, enough. Of course, most scholars reject that version, but still, it lingers in footnotes, a whisper, a maybe. When Hercules returned to Minos, the king clapped once, weakly. "Take it off the island, please." No celebration, no banquet, just a ship, hastily prepared. Hercules loaded the bull himself. The beast didn't resist, and for one surreal stretch of sea, a bull and a demigod stood shoulder to shoulder on the deck, watching waves rise like tired gods. They landed in Tyrannus 5 days later. By then, word had already reached Eurystheus when he saw the bull come. Regal, unshackled, immediately ordered it sent to pasture. "Somewhere far away," he added, "where it can't look at me." And then, without taking a breath, "Your next labor is ready." And oh, it was a gem. Manating horses, A kingdom ruled by madness, and a king whose parenting style involved feeding his enemies to animals, because subtlety was so last labor. You'd think by now Hercules had seen it all. Fire-breathing bulls, razor-feathered birds, infinite-headed swamp beasts, but no one ever prepares you for man-eating horses. Labor. Number 9. Steal the mares of Diomedes. Not just wild horses, not just dangerous ones. These mares were raised to devour flesh, human flesh, and their stable sat squarely inside the kingdom of Thracia place, best described as a bad mood with a coastline. Their owner, King Diomedes, not the Greek Herod, different guy. This one ruled a port city called Bastonia, surrounded himself with warriors, and liked to feed his enemies literalito his mares. They say he trained the horses personally, whispering madness into their ears, rewarding them with screams. They were armored, some said. Others insisted they had fire in their eyes and iron in their hooves, and whether or not the stories were true. One thing was certain, no one ever got close to those stables without leaving a few body parts lighter. Naturally, Eurystheus loved the idea. Bring me the mares, he said. Alive. Of course so. Hercules set sail again, this time north along the Aegean coast, passing islands that smelled of salt and rotting cedar, where even the gulls watched strangers with suspicion. By the time he reached Thrace, a storm was already turning the horizon into something cruel and gray. The harbor town was quiet, too quiet, not because it was empty but because the people had learned not to speak when Diomedes could hear them. Hercules walked through without fanfare. No one greeted him. A child peeked from behind a curtain, then vanished. One old woman crossed herself though, whether in protection or warning, was unclear. At the gates of the palace, 2 guards stopped him. You'll want to turn around. One said, voice flat. I'm here for the horses, Hercules replied. They both laughed, but there wasn't any joy in it. No one leaves with the horses. Try me. They let him through. Diomedes greeted him with open arms, like an old friend. Hercules, welcome. I heard you'd come. You want the mares? You're welcome to them. Stay for dinner. Try this stew. Now, here's where the fringe details spiral. One version says Hercules accepted the meal and quickly realized it was made from the flesh of a recent visitor. Another claims he never touched the food, just stared into Diomedes' eyes and said, I'm not here to eat. Either way, diplomacy didn't last long. That night, Hercules made his move. He waited until the palace grew still, until wine dulled the guards, until the moon cast long silver bars across the stable yard. The stables were metal booled of stone and ringed with thick iron fencing. Inside, the mares shifted, restless, their hooves sparking against the floor, breath hissing like steam. He stepped inside. The smell hit him first, not manure, not sweat, something meatier, raw, wrong. They saw him, and charged, 4 of them huge, muscled eyes glowing red in the dark. Their teeth weren't normal. They weren't even teeth anymore, more like saw blades and spikes, and things that never belonged in a horse's mouth. He held his ground, waited, and at the last second, roared. The kind of roar that shook rafters, that made the walls tremble, that reminded the world he wasn't just a man, he was a demigod. The mares reared, paused confused. He moved then fast, grabbed the lead mare by the neck, and threw it against the stable wall. Not to kill, just to disorient. Then the others grappled, tackled, wrestled into submission. They were strong, ungodly strong. But he was stronger. Eventually, they stopped fighting, but not because they respected him, because someone else had entered the one stable. Diomedes. He was barefoot, smiling, and holding a sword that had tasted far too much blood. You really think you can take them? He asked. I already have. They're mine. They eat what I feed them. You? Your dinner? And he lunged. Now, Diomedes wasn't a god, but he was fast, trained, cruel, and he knew how to strike at weakness. The fight spilled into the yard, sword against club, fury against will. At one point, Diomedes slashed Hercules' thigh. Deep, hot blood soaked the sand. Hercules growled, grabbed the king by the throat, and in one of the more poetic terms of the myth, fed him to his own horses. Some say it was justice. Others call it barbaric. Scholars still debate whether Hercules meant to do it, or whether it just happened in the frenzy of battle. Either way, the moment Diomedes' blood hit the floor, the mares changed. They stilled, snorted, and then calmed, as if the madness had left them with their master. He led them from the stables without chains. They didn't resist, didn't bite, just walked quietly, obedient. Something in them had broken her, maybe healed. He brought them back by sea, the ship echoing with their heavy steps. When they landed, the people of Tyrants didn't cheer. They stared. Horses weren't supposed to look at you like that. Eurystheus, predictably, refused to go near them. Put them in the hills, he ordered, waving from his bronze jar, far away. Tie them to something big. Eventually, the mares were released into the wilds of Mount Olympus, and here's the eerie part: they disappeared. No bones, no sightings, just gone. Some say they were reclaimed by the gods. Others believe they became the storm spirits that race across mountaintops during lightning storms. But that's speculation. What wasn't speculation? The next labor, a diplomatic mission of sorts, involving a queen and a belt and a whole tribe of warrior women who did not appreciate surprise visitors, especially muscle-bound ones demanding accessories. Sometimes diplomacy means a handshake. Other times, it means charging into a tribe of battle-hardened warrior women and asking for their queen's belt. Labor. Number 10. Retrieve the girdle of Hippolyta. Not steal, not fight. Obtain. Ieurystheus. Wanted. It for his daughter. A divine fashion piece. Not exactly noble, but when has that ever stopped a king with too much scroll paper and not enough spine? This wasn't just any belt. It had been gifted by Ares himself to Hippolyta, queen of the Amazonza, tribe of fierce, independent women said to have been born of war and raised by wolves, or at least trained like wolves. They were no myth. These women ruled a coastal empire near the Black Sea, skilled with bow and blade, fierce on horseback, and famously distrustful of men. So naturally, Hercules was sent to go ask them a little of her, their queen's most prized possession. Great plan. He gathered a small crew and set sail. The journey took weeks. The Black Sea, moody as ever, tossed their ship like it was offended by their purpose. Lightning flared more than once. At one point, they sailed under a flock of vultures that didn't move from the sky, just stared. When they arrived, they saw no army, no warships, just a quiet port and a city carved into hills, like it had grown there naturally. Hippolyta was waiting, tall, composed, armor shimmering in silver and violet. She stepped down from the ridge and regarded Hercules with the calm of someone who's been told one too many times that they don't look like a queen. "You've come for my belt," she said. "Not a question." "I have," he replied. "Why?" "Because if I don't, someone else suffers." She tilted her head. "Do you suffer?" He didn't answer. Now, here's where the story splits. Version 1th elegant, diplomatic version says, Hippolyta was impressed that she saw Hercules not as a brute, but as someone broken and bound by things he didn't fully control. That she agreed to give him the belt freely, out of grace, and maybe even understanding. Version 2. The bloodier one, says Hera intervened, that the goddess disguised herself as an Amazon and whispered to the others, "Hercules is here to kidnap your queen." Panic spread, and just like that, diplomacy collapsed into swordplay. Whether or not it started with misunderstanding or manipulation, what happened next was chaos. Hercules, sensing the shift, raised his hands. "I'm not here to fight." An arrow zipped past his ear. Another grazed his shoulder, and the Amazon's disciplined, swift, relentless distant, he fought back, but with hesitation. He didn't want this, didn't want more blood, but the attacks kept coming. Eventually, a spear clipped his side. He turned. It swung too hard, and Hippolyta was there, sword drawn. They collided like rival storms, queen and demigod. No words, just power and breath and blades flashing under the sun. And Hercules sality, tired from travel, from war, from guilt, her blow for blow, until finally he disarmed her, held her sword in one hand, held her belt in the other, but didn't strike. Instead, he knelt, not in submission, in sorrow. She looked down at him, breathing hard. "Do it then, I'm sorry," he said. She didn't answer, just turned and walked away. He left with the belt, and none of the victory. Now, here's your fringe detail. One obscure inscription claims that Hippolyta let him win, that her final feint was a gift, a test of what he'd do with triumph. Number one can prove it, but the idea lingers. When Hercules returned to Tyrannus, Eurystheus took the belt, sniffed, and handed it off to his daughter like it was a festival trinket. No thank you. No ceremony. Just next. And the next labor it was far, across sand and sea, past the edges of any map known to mortals, all to chase a herd of red cows. But of course, these weren't just any cows. These belonged to a monster with 3 torsos, and a personal obsession with sunbathing alone. The sun hits differently in the west. It doesn't just shine, it bears down. Relentless, ancient, the kind of heat that makes even shadows feel heavy. And it was under this heat that Hercules now walked, chasing something deceptively mundane. A herd of cattle? Yes, labor number 11. Fetched the cattle of Geryon, cattle red-hided, glowing with a divine sheen, gifted by Helios himself, and guarded like a royal fortune. These cows weren't sacred because they were Rethi, were sacred because they were someone else's. That someone Geryon, a monster of reputation and symmetry, 3 torsos, 3 heads, 3 sets of arms and legs all fused at the waist like a trident of flesh and fury. Scholars debate whether this was literal or symbolic. Was he truly tripled, or simply a man with triple power, triple wrath, and, as some fringe details claim, a single ego spread 3 ways either way? Geryon was not one to be trifled with. He lived on the island of Erythea, which lay far beyond the pillars of Hercules, very edge of the known world. Getting there meant more than travel. It meant confronting time, space, and one's own ridiculous stubbornness. But Hercules didn't complain. He just packed a waterskin, slung his bow over his shoulder, and began walking west, very west. The journey took months. He crossed deserts, where the wind screamed and the ground burned. He passed oases that weren't real. He met a man with no name who claimed to remember Atlantis before it sank. Might have been a trick of the heat, might have been something more, and then sand became glass. The sun overhead pulsed, like a dying god, and Hercules reached the edge. There, at the mouth of the world, stood 2 mountains massive, silent, twin colossi. He paused, took a breath, and struck his club into the earth. Crack. The mountains shifted, parted, and formed what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Yes, fringe scholars love to argue that this was the moment the pillars of Hercules were created, not with divine order, but with sheer stubborn muscle. The sea wind poured through, and Hercules walked into myth. He reached Erythea, under a red sky, where the sand hummed, and even the birds flew like they were guilty. The cattle, dozens of them, grazed in a field of glass grit, grass.com, and unaware of their mythological significance. But they weren't alone. The first guardian was Orthrus, a 2-headed dog, smaller than Cerberus, but not by much. It attacked before Hercules had even stepped into the clearing. 2 heads, double the bite. 1 growl in stereo. Hercules didn't hesitate. 1 swing of the Hollywood club. Crunch. 2 heads down. No drama, no speeches. the next guardian. Every Tian, the herdsman, built like a stone wall, armed with a spear, tipped in obsidian. He saw the dog fall, let out a cry, charged. Hercules caught the spear in midair, snapped it over his knee, and punched the man so hard he landed on the other side of the corral. The cattle scattered, mooed, chaos, and then came Geryon. He didn't run, he walked tall, broad, all three torsos moving in strange rhythm. Each hand held a weapon, a sword, an axe, a bow. Each head sneered with a different flavor of contempt. "You've come for my cattle," the left head said. "Coward's errand," said the middle. "Die," said the right. Efficiently, they attacked together, and Hercules sore, already sunburnt, already down to his last arrow faced what felt like a living army. Swords clashed, arrows flew. One body circled behind him while another struck from the front. The third tried to grab his legs. He fought like a storm. He let his club fly, broke one of the torsos. Clean off. Still, Geryon pressed on. He used his bow, pierced the shoulder of another. Finally, with a roar that echoed back across the sea, he drove a hydro-poisoned arrow into the heart of the last. Chest. Geryon fell. All three faces turned skyward, and stilled. The island, at last, went quiet, and Hercules turned to the cattle. They didn't flee, just watched him as if they too knew the story was bigger than all of them. He rounded them up slowly, patiently, and began the long drive home. But of course, nothing is ever that easy. Hera, furious as ever, sent a gadfly to torment the herd. A divine mosquito with a love for chaos. The cattle scattered. Hercules chased them for days. One was lost in the Alps. Another wandered into Gaul. He found one standing in a cave next to a sleeping bear. Eventually, he recovered them all, and drove them south through Italy, where the locals stared in awe, and scribbled notes that would someday become Roman mythology. By the time he reached Hyrens, he was exhausted. Sun-bleached, beard growing wild, but the cattle all accounted for. Eurystheus took one look and said, "Sacrifice them," and they were, every one of them. Some to Hera, to placate her, some to the gods of the underworld, and one, quietly, Hercules kept, not to keep, to release, into the hills above the city, where it grazed alone, a small flicker of peace in a life ruled by labors. The king, of course, didn't care. He was already giddy about the next task. "You'll need to climb," he said. "Steal something from a tree." It's simple, really. It wasn't, because the tree wasn't mortal. The apples weren't normal. And the guardian, well, he had titanic issues. If you ever find a garden guarded by a dragon, go the other way. Unless, of course, your name is Hercules. And the 11th labor wasn't ridiculous enough. Labor number 12, eat, least by some lists. Steal the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides. Doesn't sound too threatening, right? Apples. A garden? A few nymphs. Except the apples weren't apples. They were divine artifacts, glowing with the light of immortality. Gifts from Gaia to Hera herself, planted in a hidden grove at the western edge of the world. And the garden, guarded by a dragon led on, coiled around the tree like a living, scaly fence with 1,000-yard stare and 1,000 more teeth. Oh, and did we mention the tree was sacred? Untouchable. God's only. Yeah, and yet, Eurystheus wanted them. "Bring me the apples," he said. "They'll make a lovely table centerpiece." So, Hercules packed his Garrigan and headed west. Again, beyond the pillars. Beyond Geryon's island. Toward a place not even most maps dared to guess. He didn't know where the garden was. No mortal did. So he did what no man likes to admit. He asked for directions. First stop, Libya. There in the baking dunes, he ran into Antaeus, a giant who challenged every traveler to a wrestling match. No reason, just vibes. Antaeus was invincibly as long as his feet touched the earth, which meant every fight ended the same. He pinned his opponent, gloated, and buried the body in the sand. Hercules didn't know this going in, but halfway through the fight, he noticed something strange. Each time he threw the giant down and just got stronger. Finally, Hercules lifted him off the ground, held him in the air like a sack of sweaty granite and squeezed crack. Locals still point to a sand dune shaped vaguely like a flexing arm and say, that's where he did it. Anyway, back to the apples. Hercules kept moving, across scorched valleys, through canyons where nothing lived. At one point, he reached the sea again and stared into the endless horizon, wondering what else the gods had in store. He didn't have to wait long, because next, he met Prometheus. Yes, that Prometheus, still chained to a rock, still having his liver pecked out daily by a bored eagle. Hercules stood at the base of the cliff, arms crossed. You don't look great, he said. Prometheus chuckled. Dry, bloody. You should see the other guy. I need to find the garden of Hera. The apples, yeah. Prometheus winced as the eagle returned, flapping lazily. Kill that bird for me, and I'll tell you. Done. One poisoned arrow later, feathers rained like divine confetti. The Titan gasped, flexed, for the first time in centuries. He breathed. Bless you. He wheezed. Directions, please. Prometheus pointed. Find Atlas. Ask him for help. Atlas. The Titan cursed to hold up the sky. Forever casual. Hercules climbed mountains, crossed mist-shrouded ridges. Finally, on a cliff that bent toward the stars, he found Himasive groaning, knees trembling beneath the weight of the heavens. Atlas didn't. Look up. Don't bother me, he said. I need the golden apples. Then you go get them. Can't, Hercules replied. Only you know where they are. That got his attention. You want to trade? Atlas muttered. Just hold the sky, Hercules said, while you take a stroll. A long pause. Then, a grin. He shifted, grunted, shoved the heavens into Hercules' arms, like a kid handing off a heavy backpack, and Hercules gritted his teeth and held. Now let's pause here, because holding up the sky isn't just lifting, it's enduring. Every cloud, every star, every drop of cosmic weight pressing on your shoulders like an ancient, sulking elephant. Hercules stood there minutes, hours, no one knows, until Atlas returned, holding the apples. 3 of them, glowing, radiating a low golden hum like lazy thunder. Here, he said, you take them. I'll stay free, and walked past him. But Hercules, he smiled. Oh, before you go, just help me adjust this load. What the sky? My cloak's slipping. Just a second. Atlas sighed, stepped forward, took the heavens back, and Hercules picked up the apples and walked away. Scholars still debate if this was cleverness or just raw desperation. Either way effective. He returned east, the apples tucked into a satchel that smoked slightly with celestial sap. When he arrived in Tyrans, Eurystheus gasped, Are those yes? I can't actually keep them. They belong to the gods. I know. And just like that, Hercules handed them off to Athena, who returned them to the garden with a flick of her wrist. Back where they started, because some prizes were never meant to be held. And now, just one labor remained. One last challenge, the descent into Hades. To fetch a dog, but not just any dog, a 3-headed, boner-rattling, soul-sniffing hellhound named Cerberus. And this time, Hercules wasn't allowed to bring any weapons. The gates of the underworld don't creak. They breathe. They exhale dust and silence. And when you get close enough, you feel it in your lungs, sense that something ancient is watching you from the inside out. Labor number 13. Bring back Cerberus, the Hound of Hades, alive, uninjured, without weapons. Sure, why not? It was the final labor, the one Eurystheus hoped would end the whole affair not in blood, but in disappearance. After all, no mortal had entered the underworld alive and returned the same. Many never returned at all. The rules were clear. No sword, no bow, not even his lion skin. Cloaked out Hercules stood at the mouth of the cave near Tenorum, the southernmost point of mainland Greece, wind snapping around his bare shoulders. He carried nothing but a coil of rope and a calm that didn't quite fit the occasion. The cave didn't yawn, open it glared. The rocks sloped downward like teeth in a jagged mouth. No light, no sound beyond the first few feet. He stepped inside, and the world changed. The air grew cold, but not physical cold, soul cold. Memories slipped into your thoughts without permission. The smell of dirt gave way to the scent of burned laurel and dry bone. He descended in silence, past shades whispering in forgotten languages, past judges at their stone thrones, past rivers with no names, and then Styx, the river of hate, a black mirror stretching out forever, waiting Charon. Single quotes. His boat arrived without a splash, gliding like a thought through the dark. The ferryman didn't speak, just held out a hand. No coin, no bribe, but Hercules, he had his own currency. He offered pain, not by words, be simply being there. Charon looked once into his eyes and saw it, all family fire, a lifetime of battle sand, slowly nodded. The boat moved. They crossed, on the far side. The air pulsed with gloom. Buildings stood like shadows carved from deeper shadows. Wailing drifted from cracks in the ground. Somewhere far off, Sisyphus grunted at his rock. Tantalus reached for water he couldn't drink, and Hercules walked among them like a man browsing regrets. Then came Hades. The god stood beside a black column, robes of starless fabric draped over bone-pale skin. Heracles, he saddened a greeting. A warning. I come with respect, Hercules replied. Do you? I'm not here to steal, only to borrow. Pause. You want my dog? Yes. Hades tilted his head. Do you know what he guards? Yes. Do you know what he bites? Yes. Do you think you'll survive it? I'm willing to try. Now, Hades wasn't cruel. He was just thorough. Fine, he said. If you can subdue Cerberus without blades, without tricks, is yours to take. For a whelp. And with that, he stepped aside. The cavern widened, and there, in the gloom, Cerberus waited. 3 heads, each one different. One snarled, one drooled, one simply stared, unblinking, massive, muscled, black as volcanic stone. Spines ran along his back like broken swords. Chains rattled across his flanks. But they weren't restraints, they were decorations, warnings. He saw Hercules, and growled. All 3 mouths the ground shook. Hercules didn't draw a weapon, didn't even raise a hand. He spoke. I'm not your enemy. Cerberus growled louder, then lunged, and Hercules caught him, not gently. He didn't hug the monster. He wrestled it full body, arms around one neck, legs wrapped around another. The 3rd head snapped at his shoulder. He tucked and rolled. It was chaos. Biting, thrashing, flailing chaos. Cerberus scratched him across the chest. Hercules kneed him in the flank. One mouth clamped down on his arm. He roared through the pain, twisted, and pinned the dog against the rock wall. Breath heaving, blood dripping. He held all 3 heads steady, and whispered, I've known pain worse than this. I've seen loss deeper than this pit. I won't hurt you. Something shifted. Cerberus blinked, stopped, struggling, breathed, and slowly obeyed. By the time they emerged from the cave, Cerberus followed behind him like a storm on a leash. The guards at Tyron scattered. Eurystheus dove headfirst into his bronze jar again, and this time shouted from inside, Put it back. I never meant it. I was just. But Hercules didn't laugh, didn't gloat. He led Cerberus to the edge of the city, gave him one last scratch behind the ears, and the head that didn't bite Hymen whispered thanks, then turned and let him go. Cerberus vanished back into the dark, and the labor, complete, all 12. But here's the thing, they don't teach in scrolls. When Hercules came back from the underworld. He wasn't quite the same. He'd seen the end of everything, and realized he still had more to do, because the labors were finished. But he wasn't. 12 labors, 12 impossible tasks, 12 winsome brutal, some graceful, all earned. And yet, when Hercules returned to Tyrants for the final time, there were no parades, no laurels, no songs drifting up from lyres beneath fig trees, just the same old courtyard, the same cowardly king peeking from behind silk curtains, and the same gnawing emptiness in his gut. The labors were done, but Hercules was still Hercules, and that was the real problem, because what do you do after you finish saving the world? What happens when the killing ends? But the echoes downed, walked through the city unnoticed. Not because people didn't see him. How could they not bet? Because they didn't know what they were seeing anymore. A man, a monster, a demigod, a weapon waiting to be pointed at someone else. His lionskin cloak dragged behind him, worn smooth from years of battle. The club was slung casually over one shoulder. His eyes, once bright with wrath, or fire, or purpose, now seemed unlit. That's what happens when you stare into Hades and come back breathing. You start wondering what you left behind. The truth. The labors hadn't just changed. Hercules had unraveled him, thread by thread. He could still feel the warmth of Cerberus's breath, the weight of the sky, the sting of arrows in his side, the guilt pressed into the folds of his skin, and Worsage could still feel everything from before, his children's laughter, their sudden silence, his wife's final scream. That's the thing about redemption quests. No one tells you how heavy the clean slate really is, or how lonely it becomes when you've scrubbed yourself raw. So he left. No announcement, no farewells. Just walked out of the city, down the dry roads of Argelis, and kept walking. He wandered for months, helped where he could, saved a village from a flash flood, taught a farmer how to wrestle a bear without dying, sat under an olive tree with a sick girl, and told her stories until she stopped crying. He didn't want thanks, he just wanted to keep moving. Still, Hera wasn't done with him. She never was. Her vengeance wasn't satisfied with a dozen labors. She wanted his legacy broken, bent, turned into a warning for other demigods who dared to be born without her permission. And so she watched and waited. The next chapter of Hercules' life isn't as famous, not as neatly packaged. It's messy, conflicted, human. He fell in love again with a woman named Deianira, fierce, clever, warm. She didn't flinch when she saw the scars on his chest. She didn't care about gods or labors or kings. She just asked if he liked olives in his bread. They married, moved north, tried for something like peace. But peace doesn't sit long with men who've wrestled dragons. On the road one day, they came to a river, too deep to cross safely. A centaur Nosisov to carry Deianira across. Hercules agreed, but watched with narrowed eyes. And sure enough, halfway across, Nessus turned, grabbed her, tried to run. Hercules, without hesitation, drew one of his arrows tipped in Hydra's blood. Remembrant fired. The arrow pierced Nessus through the back. He collapsed on the riverbank, dying, but he wasn't done with his last breath. Nessus whispered to Deianira, "Take my blood, deuce it on your husband if he ever strays. It will keep his heart loyal." She believed him. Later, when Hercules fought again, argued, wandered, looked too long at another woman, Deianira, remembered the blood. She soaked a robe in it, gave it to him, believing it would bind his love forever. He put it on, and screamed. Because Hydra's poison doesn't care about intentions. It burned, ate through skin, melted memory. Hercules tore the robe away, but it clung like betrayal. He ran, staggered, finally climbed Mount Ota, dragging the scent of his own burning flesh with him. At the summit, he built a pyre, laid himself upon it, and waited, but not in silence. He laughed, yes, laughter, bitter, beautiful, defiant. He called to the gods. Is this it? Is this what it takes? And then flames not? Of death, of transformation, because Zeus intervened, not to save him, to change him, to burn away the mortal shell, and what rose from the ashes wasn't just Hercules, it was Hercules, the god, immortal, forgiven, accepted, at last. But here's the part they don't tell in marble statues or dusty epics. He never stopped grieving, even on Olympus, surrounded by ambrosia and golden laughter. He sometimes stared down at the world and remembered mud, fire, cattle hooves, snake heads, a girl named Megara, who never got a second chance. And in those moments, he was more human than any god, more real, because true strength isn't found in labors or lions. It's found in what you choose to carry, even when you've been told you don't have to anymore. They say, immortality feels like a crown, but Hercules knew it felt more like a scar that never fades. He stood at the edge of Olympus now. No more labors, no more orders barked by fearful kings, no more sweating through marshes or battling fire-lunged bulls under dying suns. He had ascendidlianced of mortal sign, blood, and bone. But some weight the gods don't take away. Not even they are strong enough for that. This final stretch of his story is quiet. Not inaction, just absence of struggle. There were no more monsters left to wrestle. No desperate errands to prove his worth. Up here, he was honored, revered. The stars themselves held his name, and still, at night, he wandered, not to escape, just to walk the garden paths of Olympus, or vast and winding, dotted with ambrosia trees and silver fountains that never stopped pouring. Sometimes, he'd stop to watch the stars move. Sometimes, he'd trace the calluses on his now unbreakable hands, remembering when they bled. Occasionally, he passed Athena. She'd nod. He never asked her if she approved now. Sometimes, Artemis passed by, still radiant, still silent. They never mentioned the hind. Even Hercules, even Hera looked at him differently. She hadn't forgiven him, no, but she'd stopped punishing him. That, from Hera, was practically affection, and as strange as it may sound, Olympus began to feel light, not weightless, but easier. He'd earned it, though most stories end with a hero's last breath. Hercules' tale stretched on. His name echoed in battle cries long after kingdoms turned to dust. His likeness carved into temples, painted on urns, etched into marble under 10,000 feet. But those were echoes. The real Hercules. He was the man who once tamed a beast with a stare, who held up the sky just long enough to trick a titan, who cried beside the ashes of a family he loved, and lost and loved still. He was the man who knew strength meant nothing without direction, who bore guilt heavier than any labor, who climbed his own funeral pyre with no fear, and when the last ember faded, he rose not untouched, but understood, because gods are born, but heroes are made, and sometimes sometimes they are forgiven. Too now, slow down, unclench your jaw, let your breath return to rhythm, because the journey is over now. The labors are behind us, the lion sleeps, the arrows are still, the underworld, quiet. Picture Hercules not as the roaring storm, but as a flame fading low, steady in the dark, warm, not burning. Feel the weight slip off your shoulders, just like he let go of his club that final time. No more battles tonight. No more gods asking for proof. Just silence, and stillness, and the soft exhale of a man, finally allowed to rest. So, let your eyes grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift. Let the stories settle like dust on ancient armor, because the world will be waiting when you wake. But for now, let the myths carry you, and sleep.